All right, good evening. It is 7 o'clock, and so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Stephanie Smith. I am the Director of School Counseling here in Berners Township, and part of my role here is to work very closely with our high school counseling team. And we are very excited and very pleased to see you tonight. Thank you for joining us for our senior class post-secondary planning presentation. We have a lot for you tonight. And I appreciate you taking the time to come out and to be with us. And we also want to take some time before we get started to recognize the fact that today happens to be a National Day of Remembrance, as we know, for September 11th. And so before we proceed with this evening's event, I do want to just take a moment and take a pause here and acknowledge the date that is today. So today, as he does every year, our principal, Dr. Lazovic, takes some time to recognize the day with your children and with the 2,000 people that are in his care every day walking through this building. And he reads something to your kids that I thought would be nice to read to you today so that you can hear what they heard from us. Today is Patriot Day, the National Day of Remembrance that commemorates the lives lost during the devastating act of terrorism that occurred on September 11th in 2001. Among the more than 3,000 people who lost their lives that day and the immediate victims of the attack, there were many people who participated in rescue efforts. There were heroes who ran into the towers to help others, knowing that at any moment the towers could collapse. Many Berners Township families lost loved ones, and the community, the country, and the world have been deeply affected by the events of September 11th. This year marks the 23rd anniversary of the attacks and is a day for mourning those who were lost and for celebrating all of the heroic efforts of our first responders who worked tirelessly in rescue efforts. So at this time, to honor both the victims and the heroes, we are asking everyone to observe a moment of silence and reflection, beginning now. Thank you. So after your children heard that message from Dr. Lazovic, they proceeded here. They came right here in this room, in the seats that you are sitting in, and in the lecture halls behind you. And we, the counseling department, met with all of your children today. And we spent the afternoon going through 389 responses from them of feedback on that presentation, on how they're feeling, what they're thinking about this process. And so we loved going through that as we prepare to meet with them individually this fall. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and so we had a great morning this morning with them, and I encourage you to have a conversation about their experience and ask them what their questions are and how they can prepare to meet with their counselor. So tonight, the version for you, the team has worked hard to prepare for you a presentation that is essentially in two parts. The first part is your typical slide deck. I will make sure that this slide deck is in your email inbox and posted on our website, so you can sit back and relax and take in the information tonight. We'll make sure you have all of the slides this coming week. The second part of this presentation is a Q&A with the school counselors, and so they are here to answer your questions. They will guide you through that process. What I have to say is that I ask you to keep in mind the entirety of the room and have your questions be those that can benefit all of us. And so your individual student and family questions, save that to ask your child's counselor after this presentation, individually and directly. We'll ask the questions tonight that benefit the whole group. I also want to remind you that we are recording tonight, and so we will get the recording of tonight's presentation also posted on our website within the coming week. So before we get started, I want to thank and acknowledge the school counselors who have worked on this presentation as they do every year. They always strive to be creative, to be up to date, to be in touch with current trends, and are fantastic resources for your children, and you are in very good hands. I'd like to thank Mr. Barry and Mr. Fackelman for all their support tonight, for the pretty sparkles on the screen, and for setting up the pack for us today and this evening. And I would be remiss if we did not thank our principal, Dr. Lazovic, who is an incredible support to this department, always. He's here tonight, and we're just so appreciative. We can't do this work without him and the support of the administration. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to Ms. Coviello, who will get us started.
Hi, everyone. Just want to say welcome back, and thank you all for coming here tonight to watch this presentation regarding senior year planning. We just want to say we hope you had a wonderful summer, and we are all so excited to be working with you and your child throughout this process and for our last year together. So we're going to cover a number of things in this meeting. So our goals are level changes and deadlines we're going to talk about, the 10 steps to complete the application process, how to work with your counselor, the 3 parts of the application process, the student, counselor, and teacher, help you feel more confident in the planning process, introduce the Ridge High School post-secondary planning website, and students with other post-secondary plans, we are here to help you plan and prepare no matter what they choose, trade school, military, four-year college, we're here to support them through the process. I just want to first go through our Ridge High School planning website, all college planning. This is the ultimate resource for anything college and post-secondary planning related. So there's a couple of things that I want to highlight on the left-hand side here. Here's where you'll find all of the different tabs of resources for you and your child when figuring out college stuff. So for example, we're going to go over the 10 steps today. So I just want to click this specific tab, 10-step process, because this is where you can refer back to it as well. This is, step 1, 2, 3, with added video tutorials within that. So this is a great resource if, you forget how to request letters of recommendation. You can watch a video tutorial on that. So it's like step by step, making it as simple as possible so you complete each step and feel more confident along the way. Some other things that I highlighted earlier when we were presenting to the seniors were, for example, which one? The Common Application. That's a really helpful tab as well. So there's tips going through the whole application in each section, such as before you begin. There's the education section, specific information on how to fill that out. So there's specific questions within the Common App too, which can sometimes get kind of confusing. So this is a great resource to refer back to. So all of this helpful resources on here. Something that's also helpful is college visits. So right now we just started our Ridge High School college visits in the Media Center. So it tells about all things college-related visits, such as our annual college fair, which is in October, the college rep visits. This is the sign-in link here, where students can sign up and go to the Media Center. And then also we're even hosting college workshop series hosted by us. For example, if a student needs a little extra support in college essay writing, maybe helping fill out the self-reported academic record, or just general questions, this is something that we're doing also throughout the school year, starting very soon. And then again, there's multiple tabs, multiple helpful things. Events and presentations just like tonight, it's all listed here, and things that are coming up in the future as well, such as the college fair, financial aid night, and then as well as all of the video recordings you can find here as well. So those are a few things that I wanted to, highlight. Just take time and look through it because again, it's super helpful resource. Okay. So we're going to talk about schedule changes. There's a lot of different windows for schedule changes, dropping, adding a course. So just to cover the main things, to drop a course, a half-year course, that's September 27th, or February 16th for a semester 2 course. If your student wants to drop a full-year course, that's October 11th. And after these dates, dropping a course, you will get a W, which means withdrawn, on your transcript. So just some things to keep in mind. So if your student wants to add a course may be added this time in lieu of a study hall within the first 10 days of the course. And if they want to level down, so just from like an AP course to an honors, they're permitted until October 23rd, and that's pending seat availability, if there's enough seats. So, and the same thing goes with leveling up, if you want to go from CP to honors. That's also pending seat availability, and with supervisor approval. And that's happening right now between September 6th and 18th. So a reminder that we said to the seniors earlier, or that changes are best made before their transcript is sent out to any colleges. This is because, they'll have a different transcript sent, to the school, and if something changes, they'll have to contact the school to let them know that there's been a change to their transcript. So our role as counselors, we're here to offer support and guidance while applying, answer any questions that you may have or your student may have, and we have individual senior meetings with each student. And that's not like our only meeting. It's not like we just have that one meeting. If they ever reach out to us, stop by, email us. If they need extra support, we're here to help them and have an additional meeting if necessary. So there's 3 types of applications. The most common is the common application. So we encourage you to use this one, mainly because it links with Naviance, and many schools are on the common application. It's just one application where you can put all of your schools on, so it's in one location, it's much more simplified, and it links with Naviance. Naviance is a system that we use to send college documents, such as letters of recommendation. That's where they will be requesting letters of recommendation on too, and where we send transcripts and all of that stuff. So the other type of application is the coalition application. That's less common, and that's used by only certain colleges. And then university applications. That is specific to a school, and each school has their own. But again, it can be easier instead of using individual university applications just to use the common app since it's all in one place. So in the meetings, the student may choose which application to submit, and they can discuss that with us during their meeting. So I just mentioned this earlier when showing you the website, but college visits at Ridge High School. So again, they're in the media center. They can sign up via the Google form on our website, which I showed in the college visits tab there. It's a great way to ask college representatives questions. So they will actually be there, in person or virtual. And for virtual visits, they can bring their Chromebook, but again, they'll be held during the school day. And it's a great way to learn more about colleges. They can come with questions. They don't have to come with questions. They could just learn about the school. So it's a great way to, meet a representative as well. Okay, so I'm going to hand this off to Ms. Hughes.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I know that Ms. Coviello mentioned the website. I am going to definitely reflect back on that a few times. But overall, what we've done for your students was try to break down the college application into 10 steps to make it a little bit more digestible, easy to understand, and all of that. So what I'm going to do is review the majority of those steps with you tonight before handing off the presentation. But if you are ever looking to find these steps at home or when you're outside of the building, they are also on the website that Ms. Coviello mentioned earlier. And there's a video tutorial on the website for almost every single one of these steps. So if you're at home thinking I want to do one of these things or I want my student to do one of these things, you can always watch a quick video. It's 1 to 2 minutes on how to do each step. Okay, so step 1, most students have already done at least half of this step. Step number 1 is completing the senior packets, and there is a Part A and a Part B. Part A of senior packet was due all the way back in June. You might remember filling out a parent brag sheet for senior packet Part A, so that is the initial part of this step. And the second step, part of this step is senior packet Part B, And the deadline for that is coming up next week on September 20th. So packet Part B, definitely not as lengthy as Part A. It's going to be a couple permission forms, a list of anticipated colleges that the student will be applying for, and just some information that we need to know about who would be writing the letter of rec for your student. So it's not going to be nearly as lengthy or those essay type of questions. So why are we asking the students to do each of these packets? Both of them serve a little bit of a different purpose. Part A is going to help us write a personalized letter about your student from the counselor perspective. So there's a lot of things that they do outside of school that are really great that we either might not know or might not know all about, which is why we ask the student to give us as much information as we do. And then packet Part B helps us prepare to set up a meeting with them, so we'll know generally what their timelines are, where they're planning to apply, how soon they're ready to meet, and all of that. So that would be the purpose of the second packet. Okay, so step 2 is a really simple step. In fact, it should take 1 or 2 minutes, and that would be just paying the transcript fee. So every student has to pay the $7 transcript fee, but luckily it's a one-time fee that you pay on the website, and it covers every transcript that the student will send throughout senior year. So their initial transcripts to any school they apply to, any middle of the year transcripts, and then also their final transcript at the end of the year that they decide to send to where they're going to. So it's super easy, it's all done online, and we're checking for that usually every day. So if you pay it one day, the next day it will be marked off as done. Okay, so step 3 is where we start to involve Naviance, which is a program that your students are probably pretty familiar with. You've probably seen it before. One of the main things would be going onto Naviance and sort of working with the colleges I'm thinking about and colleges I'm applying to tab. Now, I mentioned this to seniors today. If your student ever forgets their login, their password gets locked out of their Naviance account, this happens all the time, they can email us, we can always reset their password. And same from the parent account, we can typically reset that as well. If you haven't been in a while or can't recall exactly what your password was, we can help with that too. So with the different lists in Naviance, there is a section called Colleges I'm Thinking About. Students typically have filled that up during our junior conference in the spring of junior year and put schools that they were interested in. And what we're gonna ask is this year, they start moving those over to the Colleges I'm Applying to tab, which means I plan to actually apply to these schools. There is a video tutorial on how to do this step. It's really simply as easy as checking off some boxes and converting them to applications in Naviance. So this step is pretty straightforward. Okay, so step 4 is going to be where we venture into the Common App. I know Ms. Coviello mentioned the Common App is the most common app, which it is. Most schools take the Common App. So most students are going to at least create a Common App profile and add 1 or more schools to it. So they're gonna go to the Common App website. The first few sections on the Common App are really straightforward. It's gonna ask some information about the student in Ridge High School. It's gonna ask demographic information about the student, all things that are not school specific, just student specific that they need to fill out. There are a lot of questions on the education section of the Common App that are Ridge specific. So it will ask things like how many students are in your graduating class? What is your GPA scale at your high school? And every year we have students who are either not sure or potentially maybe fill out the wrong information in that section. So what I would encourage is making sure that your students are checking our post-secondary website. There's a page that actually lists out the answer to every single one of those questions so that they don't have to take a guess how many students they're graduating with or exactly how our GPA scale works. Okay, so step number 5 consists of continuing through the Common App and completing something called the FERPA waiver. You may have heard of this before, you may not have heard of this yet, that's okay. But I want to explain a little bit about what this waiver is and what it does for the student. So the FERPA waiver is essentially whether the student is deciding to waive their right to read their letters of recommendation in the future. If they waive their right, that means that they will never have access to the letters of recommendation that have been written on their behalf from teachers, counselors, anyone who submits those to a college. If they choose to not waive their right, they may in the future have access to those letters. And I say they may have access to it because it was something that they would have to ask the college for in the future when they are a student there if they can see it at that point. We are not allowed to share them with the student. So a lot of students ask, well, what is the right answer or what is the best thing that I can do when I'm deciding between yes or no in waiving my rights? And in general, we see that colleges most of the time do want students to waive their right because it helps them feel confident that the letter is non-biased, it's not going to be viewed by the student, and that whoever is writing the letter is feeling comfortable in writing that letter. That does not mean that students can't waive their right if they don't feel like that's the right thing. They absolutely can. It's just something that they would need to consider and you would need to consider as a family. The FERPA waiver is completed through the Common App, so they will complete a yes or no in there. But the one thing the student should know is once they do complete that form, they cannot change their answer. So if they're sort of mulling back and forth on that section, give it some time, ultimately make the best decision they can because they won't be able to go back and change what they've put there. Okay, so after the FERPA waiver, students get to do this really awesome thing called linking or matching their Common App with Naviance. Why this is important is because Common App syncs up really well with Naviance, and it allows us to send documents freely to schools that are on the Common App through Naviance. So that is how the school will send letters of rec, your student's transcript, all of that. And so it's important that we match them up together. This would be for any student that's using the Common App at least for one school. And this is something that they will do in Naviance under the Colleges tab. Same thing as I mentioned with some of the other steps. It should take a few minutes at most. There's a little sync or match button. And as long as the email address matches on both of those accounts, it should be really straightforward. If a student does run into issues, they're saying, I'm trying to link it, it's not working, definitely send them our way. We've definitely found sometimes that it's just a matter of maybe the email address or refreshing their Naviance account or something like that. And it's important to know that students, we can't send transcripts or letters on their behalf until this part happens, because that's how they actually get there. So if students are moving ahead in the process, they just need to make sure that they have done this step so that we can send anything on their behalf. Okay, so a little bit more about the teacher letters of rec. I know I had mentioned earlier sort of how they get there and waiving the right versus not. But there are some specifics about the teacher letters and some questions we get about them that you guys should know. If you are sitting here and your student either hasn't asked teachers for letters yet, or maybe they're thinking they could use another one or something like that, that is 100% okay. I would just encourage them to do that as soon as they can. We want to make sure that they are giving their teachers ample amount of time to write a letter, especially because they might be writing for multiple students. So if they haven't asked already, now is a great time. Students will hear their teachers a lot of times say, hey, I can do this, but can you request me a Naviance? And so there is similarly a video tutorial on how to request them in Naviance as well. But essentially, students will just choose from a drop-down menu of the teachers here at Ridge and be able to choose who they want to request their letter from. And then that teacher essentially gets a notification that, hey, this student has requested a letter from you. You want to make sure, as I mentioned, that you're giving the teachers ample time to write and send the letter. So something that we mentioned with students today is that if their deadlines change, so maybe they were planning to apply somewhere a little bit later, but now they've decided, hey, I want to apply somewhere October 15th or November 1st. Just make sure that they're keeping the teachers in the loop on that so that the teacher can prepare and have enough time to submit that letter rather than them realizing after the student has applied that deadlines have changed. A big question that we get is, how do I know how many letters schools will accept? And we would say the general rule of thumb is students want to have 2 letters, but it does vary school by school, and students can check this both on the school's admission department website and then also through Naviance. So some schools cap it at 1, some cap it at 2, some don't have a cap at all, so the students should just be cognizant of that when they're looking at their requests in Naviance. The teachers do send the letters directly to the school, so it's not going to go from the teacher to the student or to us and then to the school. It does get sent electronically straight through to the school. And then one more important piece of information. The student may come across a section on the Common App that says add recommenders. And sometimes that trips students up a little bit because they know they have to request letters on Naviance, and they're thinking, why is it asking me to do this on the Common App as well? For the sake of Ridge students, since we send all of our documents through Naviance, they can essentially ignore that section because we are not sending letters through the Common App. We're lucky enough to use Naviance, so they do not need to complete that section. So I know Ms. Coviello touched a little bit on the senior meeting, which we have with each one of our seniors an individualized meeting. This is the most formal meeting we'll have, not the only meeting we'll have. But the way that we get to know whether your student is ready to have that meeting or not is through a Google form that we have as an assignment in our Google Classroom. This is essentially just a checklist where the student has to go in and submit it, basically certifying that they have done the first few steps of the process and they are ready to have a meeting. After we receive a completed checklist from a senior, we typically will look at their schedule, look at our schedule, see what works, and then reach out to them directly. So if it's not right away or that day, it is okay, don't panic. We will find something that works for both of us. But this is how they're gonna let us know, hey, I'm ready to meet. I've at least gotten this far in the process. Okay, so talking a little bit about test scores really quick. A common question that we get asks whether our test scores, our students' test scores are on their transcript and if there is a way they can be on their transcript. At Ridge, test scores are not included on the transcript. So if a student does need to send an SAT or an ACT score, that would be gone about through a little bit of a different process. It wouldn't be something that's included in the materials from Ridge. So typically, if a college is asking for an official score report of a test, like the SAT or ACT, you would need to go onto the website of that particular test, so either College Board or the ACT website, and have that score sent officially, which just means it's going directly from the testing agency to the college. We often get questions too about AP scores. What role do AP scores have in the application process? How do I send those? When do I send those? And generally, AP scores are actually not part of the application process itself. Rather, they are part of sort of figuring out with the college the student eventually decides to go to, whether they'll be receiving credit for that class and how they will be receiving credit for that class. Typically, AP scores, not part of the application, but the AP class, of course, would appear on the student's transcript. Okay, so you may have heard over the last few years the phrase test optional. It was increasingly common during the pandemic and now coming off of it. It really does depend on the school. But test optional schools mean that they have opted to have a policy where they do not require a standardized test score to make a decision on an applicant. You do want to make sure that your student and yourself are checking each school's individual website. We have seen it before, unfortunately, but it does happen, where colleges say they are test optional, but after looking a little deeper into their policy, their website maybe states that they are test optional only if you are applying with above a certain GPA, or only if you are applying to certain programs and not others. So you want to make sure that you're double checking on that, so that way you are still having your student give themselves the best opportunity of being accepted. And a big question we get from students every year is, does test optional really mean test optional, or should I still submit my score anyway? And I would say that generally the schools that are still continuing to have test optional policies at this point have done so because they are confident in their ability to choose students to be accepted without that test score. If they are choosing to remain this way, they truly are that way. There should be no statistical difference between students who do submit and don't submit. So if it is not going to help your application and they are test optional, sometimes it might be the right decision to not send those test scores, and that's okay. Another thing that has come up a lot over the last few years is the idea of self-reported test scores. Some schools have gotten really fancy and they allow students to self-report their test scores on some part of their application. So essentially they're saying, you tell me what you got on this test and we will take that as your score when we're reviewing your application. We did tell our students today that if a school is self-report for their test scores, still be as accurate as you can, because if you choose to enroll in that school, then they will ask you for an official copy of those test scores. It just sort of puts that step down the road in case the student does choose to go to that school. So they will confirm in the future, did this student give us accurate information? So it's important that when they do complete that, they are being accurate. Okay, so since official test scores are sent by testing agencies like SAT and ACT, we would say that we can't necessarily control the timelines that they take to send those test scores to the colleges. So you want to make sure you're doing that enough in advance that they will get to the schools on time. So if you have a student who right now has a pretty confident idea of places they're going to apply to and places that need those test scores, it does not hurt to send those test scores to the schools early. Essentially, whatever gets there first is what's going to start their file at that school, and if it's the test scores, that is more than okay. But just make sure you're being aware and the students are being aware of how much time they're giving those testing agencies to send those scores. You may run into something called rush reporting or priority reporting, depending on the testing agency. In general, we would not recommend students to send test scores this way. Oftentimes, colleges do not look at test scores that are rush reported, or sometimes it ends up getting really backlogged, and those actually end up taking the same amount of time that a regular test score will take. So we definitely don't recommend doing that for any of our students. Really quick, in case you have students who are planning to test at all again this fall, each time a student does take the SAT or ACT, they are given up to 4 slots where they can select a school that those scores can be sent to for free. The downside is that score is sent without necessarily the student seeing it first, because they're selecting it at the time of the test date. But it's just something to think about if they are maybe really set on a school or somewhere requires a test score. They always could add them while they are actually sitting for the test, and that's free of cost. Okay, so I am going to turn it over to Ms. Cahill to finish up with the next couple of steps.
Good evening. One of the things I wanted to mention just really quickly on the last slide. I had a student actually ask me this question today, so I thought that it was really important to share it with you as well. Students often have trouble figuring out, with all of these test optional policies, whether or not they should in fact submit their test scores to particular schools. And the nice thing is they get to decide per school. On the supplement portion of the Common App, the school will actually ask them, do you wish your test scores to be considered by this institution? And they can say yes or no. So it's not a blanket answer. They don't have to say yes or no across the board. They can decide per school. One of the most important ways to make that determination is to look at something called the Common Data Set. Every school in the United States is required to provide that information each year to applicants who may be interested in that information. It will be on their website. It's published information. So what you should be seeing now is the 23-24 data. So if you Google any school's name and the words Common Data Set, you should be able to find that information on their website. In Schedule C of that Common Data Set is the information about how many students have submitted test scores. So like for example, for the SAT, what percentage of last year's applicants submitted their scores and what percentage did not? Also for the ACT, the same information. You do have to figure that there could be an overlap, right? There may be some students who submit both the SAT and the ACT, so those percentages actually may have an overlap. But the other important thing to consider is, where does that score fall within that particular school's profile of accepted applicants? So for example, does it fall in the 25th percentile, the 50th percentile, or the 75th percentile? And what we recommend to students is, if they're not at least that 50th percentile, that they should consider not reporting their scores to that school. Because as Ms. Hughes mentioned, you want to report scores if they help you. You don't want to report scores if it potentially hurts you. So that is a terrific way for students to compare themselves to the previous year's applicant pool. Now, of course, they're not comparing themselves to this year's applicant pool because that's impossible, but at least you're getting the most current data you could possibly have in order to make an informed decision about whether to submit those scores. So I just wanted you guys to be aware of that. We have mentioned it to students. I mean, I'm sure you know when you say things to your own child how much of that they absorb, so I do feel like it's important information to share. Okay, step 9, requesting transcripts. So what students were told today is that this is a process that gets done in the student Naviance account. The reason that that is important is that you may feel the need to help. Thankfully, you actually can't help them do this because they can only do it in their own student Naviance account. I would also say it's really important to try not to help too much, because then they don't know what's been done and what hasn't been done, and they start to get confused. So it's important that they are going into their Naviance account and requesting their transcripts. The transcripts cannot be requested until they have done all of the things that we have talked about prior to step 7. So basically, they have to have done those first 6 steps and submitted their Google form, and they have to have met with us. When they sit down to have their senior meeting is when we log in and we clear them to request transcripts. Then they will have the ability to request those transcripts. Unfortunately, the error message that comes up on Naviance when they haven't done all of those things is, we do not have parent permission to send your transcripts. I mean, why we have not changed that in the 18 years I have been here, I have absolutely no idea, but it's what it says, so we're stuck with the language. It is not because you didn't provide permission, it is because we haven't done the first 6 things and we haven't met with your child. So if they are getting the error message, do not be prompted to pay the transcript fee again. Don't do that. We can't refund it to you. I prefer that you pay $7 and not $14 or $21 or $28 or whatever number that you get to by the time you realize that wasn't the problem. And also, it's because they actually haven't met with us. So just please, if they are running around trying to figure out why it is that they can't request their transcripts, another reminder to them of like, I know they told you this, but like, don't forget that like you haven't had your senior meeting yet, so that's the reason you can't request your transcripts. Students do need to request transcripts for every school to which they're applying, because ironically, they actually go in Naviance to every school to which they're applying. However, there is a caveat. We may be sending them the transcript, but there are some schools that require them to self-report. They are actually not going to use our transcript. They are going to use a self-report mechanism that the students have to follow. That self-report, I'm going to go over in a few minutes, can be done in multiple ways, and schools have their preference as to how students do that. Not every school is self-report, but some are, and that information can be found on their admissions website. It's why it's really important that students are not just using Naviance and the Common App. They have to be looking at the school's individual websites in order to understand their policies, their procedures, and what documents are actually required of them. Okay. Step 10. This is the part that everybody wants to get to, right, where you complete your applications, although the part that the kids don't realize is this is where they then have to wait. So actually they've got a lot of stuff to do before they get to step 10, and then after step 10, then they're stuck just waiting. But at step 10, they're completing their applications by their chosen deadline, hopefully before their chosen deadline, and they are paying online for those applications. So when they get to the point where they finish an application on the Common App, they've done the entire Common App portion, and they've done the school's supplemental portion, and they get to a place where they click review and submit, and that is where they are going to make their payment. They make their payment, confetti happens on the screen, everybody celebrates. At that point, they will have then submitted that application. When they are filling out the Common application, there is the Common App essay. The Common App essay is therefore designed to go to every school to which they are applying, which means it is not school specific. They are writing a personal statement or a common essay that is going to every school to which they are applying. Supplemental essays are the ones where they can become more school specific, and this is a question that is actually asked of them by a particular school. So questions like, why this place? Or why this program at this place? Not every school has those types of questions, so they will be excited to see the ones that don't, and they can just quickly answer the demographic questions in the supplement and go ahead and submit. But for those that do, there may be a writing portion, and what we told students today is, plan ahead for that. You want to know if there is another essay that you have to complete for schools so that you don't get to the end of the application and become surprised when you have another essay. Even if it's 250 words, if it's October 31st at 10, you don't want to find out that you have an essay you haven't written. So that's really important that they get organized about what schools have supplement questions. The other nice thing is that supplement questions often follow sort of a theme, like this idea of why this school or why this major within this school. So what they might be able to do, for example, is provide themselves with a couple real good paragraphs about why they're interested in a particular type of major that they may be able to somewhat repeat between schools. And then you start to look for those school-specific pieces of information that you can slide into that to make it even more obvious that that school is the right fit for your student. But again, that takes time. They have to do research. They have to be able to answer those questions specifically. I said to your students this morning, I could write you a Common App supplement in probably under a minute because I've seen a lot of college campuses. I could tell you how pretty the campus is, how it's centrally located, how it's located in a city, close to internships. I could tell you how they have a tremendous academic reputation, blah. It doesn't tell you anything about why that specific school is the right place for your specific person, right? That's what takes time. So that's what your student has to give themselves, is enough time to be able to thoughtfully research and answer those questions. So that's the supplemental essays. So again, even though this is step 10 and we're talking about completing the application, we want to make sure that they have completed it thoughtfully and that they've done it in their timeline. If they want to apply early action, again, they don't want to find out the day before the November 1st deadline that there's something sort of major that they haven't considered and haven't written. Okay, early decision deadlines. So not every student is going to use this type of a deadline. An early decision deadline is binding. So that means, if accepted, I will attend. There are two parts of the timeline where you might see an early decision. The first one is an ED1. Typically, these are due November 1st, November 15th, so they are earlier on in the year. The ED2 deadlines are typically the same time as the regular decision deadline. So usually you're talking about January 1st, January 15th, possibly February 1st, but somewhere in that general vicinity after the winter recess and in the very beginning part of the winter. The reason that that is significant is that you might have your child say to you, well, I'm going to apply early decision to these 2 places. And what you will probably want to think to yourself is, you can't do that. Well, maybe you can. If they're doing one in an ED1 and then they don't get into that institution and they get either deferred to regular decision or they are told, I'm sorry, but this isn't the right fit for you, they could in fact then choose to do an early decision 2 deadline, assuming they will find out from the first institution before the second deadline. So that is another thing to coordinate and to be clear about whether they are permitted to use an ED1 and an ED2. We can help them to understand how to coordinate that, and they may also have to communicate directly with schools to understand what their timeline looks like. When you are applying early decision as a student, you have to sign the ED agreement saying that you understand that if you are accepted, you do plan to attend. The parent will also have to sign off electronically, and then the counselor also has to sign off electronically. So there is, of course, a checks and balances to how many of them they are applying to and when. What is very important is that if your student changes their mind about an ED, we need to know that because we have to be able to know that we have to sign off. Not that this is particularly significant to you, but it's very significant to us. When we do that is when we actually send transcripts. So if your child has requested transcripts fairly early on and we've gone ahead and sent them, let's say on, I don't know, October 1st, and then they change their mind and decide to apply someplace early decision, they might do all the right things. They check it off in the Naviance account, they put it in the Common App, and then they're like, how come you didn't sign my agreement? Because I already sent your transcripts and nothing popped up for me to send your agreement. That's why you need to communicate with me so that I can go in and sign the agreement. It takes seconds. It's super easy, but I have to know it's there and I have to know that it's time for me to do that. So it is very important that they are keeping track of major changes like, am I applying early decision or have I decided not to apply someplace early decision? So they should notify us with any changes. Again, these things are signed electronically, so these are not actually written signatures anymore. Within the Common App, they are done electronically within Common App. For schools that are non-Common App schools, they may have a slightly different process. It is still typically electronic. Is it remotely possible that they're still using a form? It's remotely possible. Most schools are pretty much using electronic ways of signing off. Okay, self-reported coursework and grades. This is the bane of many of our existence lately. Schools love it, right? Colleges think this is fantastic because they have all of the information they want from students in a platform where they can move it around and do what they want with it. So it's great for them. It's not so great for the person who has to sit with their transcript and type in all of their courses from freshman year through senior year and all of their grades. It's annoying, it's a little tedious. Not impossible, but just a little annoying and a little tedious. Also, there's room for error, so it is really important that your student take their time, that they have a copy of their transcript handy. This is not the time to see if you can remember what you've gotten over the course of the last 3 years. I can't remember what I ate yesterday. There's no way I would remember what I got freshman year in ceramics. So it's really important that they're using their transcript and not guesstimating because as Ms. Hughes mentioned with self-reporting your test scores, there will come a time at which they want to compare what you've given them and what you are sending at the end, and they best line up. So it's really important that they are using their transcript when they're doing this. They may need their state student ID number. A state student ID number is not a Ridge High School ID number. It is actually a state-issued number. It's on their transcript. It can also be found in Naviance. But again, if you have a copy of your transcript, it's right there. So it's easy for them to follow along with what they might need to input. So what is a self-report? A self-report means that they are, again, typing in all of their courses and grades over the course of the 3+ years that they have been in high school. They may go by different names. So one of them is called the SRAR. It merged with another one that was called the SSAR, thank God, because they used to be 2 separate ones, now they're one. There's also the courses and grades section on the Common App. The nice thing about the schools that use that is it's really in your face because you go to complete the Common App and poof, it pops up because you need to do it. So awesome, you can't mess that one up because it's actually there and you can't submit unless you've completed the courses and grades section. But then also, some schools are even more confusing and have decided to come up with their own SRAR, which they probably have hidden in their portal. And so again, when I say to you, don't be tempted to help too much, it's because you actually can't access certain things. And if you don't know what you're doing, you are bound to make more of a mess than your student coming in and just saying, help, and then we help them through it. So the portals are definitely another area where you lose total control. Like, they get the portal information, they can log in, you have no idea what they're doing, and did they do it or did they not do it? So this is why it's also super important that if they have been a student that needed a little bit of micromanagement, and so maybe you had a tendency to do a little bit more of that, this is the time to say things like, hey, like, do you want me to help you maybe look at some of the websites, figure out what the things are that you need to do, and then you can check them off as you go through, right? So you're still like assisting them in getting organized, but they're truly the people who are checking off the things as they do them. Okay, so those are the different ways that they may be self-reporting their grades, and as Ms. Hughes mentioned before, potentially also their test scores. Whether they can self-report their test scores is going to be on that school's website. They've got to read very carefully to see if they're truly self-reporting or if they have to send an official score. But what's nice about a self-report is it's one less thing that you have to worry about whether it's going to get there, whether it's going to get there in time, and it also is something you then don't have to pay for, which frankly, when it comes to the college process, you should celebrate and not pay extra things that you don't have to pay. Okay, so some important tips. Again, checking the school's admissions website for the directions and following them carefully. Either the good thing or the sad thing about the application process is it might be about 8/10 about following directions, to be honest. I mean, you cannot successfully apply to college if you do not follow the directions. So, you know, how amazing you are is only shown by whether or not you've actually submitted every piece of the application. Talking to your counselor about any additional essays or things they want to share. Super important. We have had students, for example, who are like budding artists or budding musicians, not trained, but people who just enjoy what it is that they do and may even be pretty good at it. If you provide them with something supplemental, you have to be aware that they may send it to an art professor who's been doing this for 25 years. A musician who is trained to look for certain things in a supplemental music piece. If you don't want to be scrutinized at that level, you may not necessarily want to submit that supplement, and you have to know how that school utilizes that supplemental information because it may or may not be helpful at that point. The same thing with supplemental essays. We've had students who want to share something additional. There's a portion of the Common App that says basically any additional information that you don't feel is reflected someplace else in the application that you can share in this particular supplemental essay. Whether your students should use that should be something that gets discussed. It should get discussed between you and your student, and it should probably also be discussed with your counselor so that we're certain that it's something that they truly should be sharing, that it isn't something that maybe has a possibility of hurting them more than helping them. There are just a lot of reasons why they want to be sure that this is something that adds to their application. And I mentioned before, don't forget about supplements. Okay, so what's next? So you've now submitted everything, or your child is now, you probably have, hopefully you haven't submitted anything, they have submitted everything. And now you need to see if they have monitored the status of their application. So it's time to say things like, hey, did you get a portal for that school? Have you checked it? The schools are telling them if something is missing. So that's wonderful because it means that it's a way to catch yourself if there's something that you may not have done. The unfortunate thing is that usually somewhere around 90% of applicants submit within about 24 hours of the deadline. So the sad thing is there's not a lot of time to catch yourself if you submit within 24 hours of a deadline. Now, do schools sometimes give a little bit of a grace period afterwards? Some of them do. Some of them do not because they have a regular decision deadline and they will simply move you from an early action deadline to a regular decision deadline. There is nothing more frustrating than rushing around like a lunatic to submit something and then realizing that you're actually not going to be considered until the next pool. So it is really important that they try to submit things early, try to check things and make sure that they were received. It does not require hysteria. It just might require like them saying to us, like, you did send my transcripts, and we remind them, yeah, you can actually look and check in Naviance to see if they were sent and on what day they were sent. Did my teacher send their letter? Actually, it shows you in Naviance that they did send their letter. So we can remind them of things that, like, the school might have it, they just haven't reflected that they have it yet. That happens all of the time, but we can help them to navigate that, assuming that they're checking to make sure that a school has things. We automatically send first marking period grades unless students opt out of doing that. So we stressed to them the importance of being the same student this year, if not better than they were in previous years. We also automatically send mid-year reports. Mid-year reports are required by most schools, so we are automatically sending the mid-year report, which is sent out in February after the conclusion of the first semester. College visits, as Ms. Coviello and Ms. Hughes mentioned, are in the Media Center. Your student can sign up for them. We've put a link in our Google Classroom to the sign up, and it's also on our website. We mentioned our College Counselor Workshop series on things like the SRAR, essay writing, general questions. We've recommended to your student, come sit with us at your lunch, bring your laptop, and let's get some stuff done. It's a great way of keeping yourself on track. You just sign up for these little workshops and we get you through the process because you come and you get stuff done. The college fair is October 10th. So some final reminders we gave your students on social media etiquette, for example, that really when you put it out there, it might in fact be seen by people that you don't want to see it. So it's really important for them to be appropriate online. It's important for them to use an appropriate email address. Gone are the days where you're using PookieBear45. It's time for you to use a email that reflects your name, for example, something appropriate. Financial aid, unfortunately, it appears that the FAFSA is going to be somewhat similar to the way it was last year in that it's rolled, hopefully not as bad as it was last year, but it will be rolled out later than it was in the past 5 years prior to this year. So it's going to be somewhere probably around December 1st. Don't quote me. I have nothing to do with when it's released. It's also supposedly going to be released like a soft release, meaning that some people may have the ability to fill it out before other people. Don't ask. So it's something to continue to check back and see whether or not your student can go ahead and complete it. Some schools require something called the CSS profile, which is a separate document, takes into account some additional information that the FAFSA does not. Typically, these are private schools, typically. However, University of Virginia, which is not a private school, happens to require it. So it's important for your child to check the list of which schools require the CSS profile, or to check the school's financial aid website, within that particular university, to determine what documents are required by that school to apply for financial aid. Interestingly enough, for the class of 2025, this is the first year where New Jersey is requiring those students who are graduating in the class of 2025 to complete a FAFSA. Now, if you are informed and you're we don't want to complete a FAFSA, there is a waiver process. I will tell you that I say to my students, I think everyone should complete a FAFSA. And the reason I think that is that if, God forbid, something were to happen to you or to your job or to your ability to do your job, and that changed your financial status in the middle of an academic year where your child was enrolled in college, if they have not submitted a FAFSA by the original FAFSA deadline, they cannot file what's called a change in circumstance form, which means you have to wait until the next year to be reconsidered for aid. And if you need it now, you're not going to be able to get it if you have not filed that initial FAFSA. So truly, now that it's a lot shorter, and if it ever rolls out, it will be a lot easier for you to complete it, but I just wanted you to be aware that there is a change to this year, that students will have to complete the FAFSA to meet a graduation requirement in New Jersey, and we will work through that process with your students. We have our dates for our upcoming counselor calendar posted in our on our website, and we also try to send out reminders to you and blasts so that you are aware of what's upcoming. We really appreciate when you come to our events because it is really lovely to look at your faces rather than a sea of seats. So we'd love for you to be at all of our upcoming events if you can be. Okay, finally, she's on to final thoughts. Okay, so this year, I actually specifically asked my department if I could speak at the end of the presentation to highlight what I felt were the important and influential roles that you play as parents during the post-secondary process. While we have provided you with all of the how-tos at this point for your student to complete the application process, now we want to step back and talk about the piece that you can play in the application process, which is often the emotional piece. Some of you may know that last year I went through this process not only as a counselor, but as a parent. I have a child who graduated here at Ridge in the class of 2024. So not only was I a counselor last year, but I was also a parent in your shoes. And thankfully, my daughter is very happy. She's a freshman at a nursing program at University of New Hampshire. So I do feel like I have the unique ability to understand this process from both the counselor perspective and the parent perspective. As counselors, we really want to acknowledge that you are likely experiencing a lot of feelings about this process that could include trepidation, wondering if you've prepared them for these next steps, worrying about whether they'll be happy, and wondering how you can support them in the process, as well as potential having excitement for them about this new adventure. You may find yourself looking at pictures of your child on the first day of kindergarten or other childhood milestones with extreme nostalgia, which you will definitely be doing once you go to do the yearbook thing. We also want to remind you that your child is likely experiencing a host of feelings about applying to college and what their lives will look like after Ridge. In fact, some of their fears or concerns might mirror yours, but they also may not be admitting that they're having any of those thoughts or feelings. As counselors, we understand that this time is filled with a great deal of mixed emotions for both of you. In our offices, we watch students exhibit a myriad of feelings: pure excitement and joy, disappointment, uncertainty, fear. Applying to college and all that follows by nature presents a lot of unknowns. And for some of your students, this is actually the first time they've encountered this level of unknown. Since unknowns are unpredictable, this inevitably leaves a lot up to their imagination. While that can be fun, new, and exciting, it can also be scary. After navigating this myself last year, I wanted to share a few unsolicited pieces of advice. The first is, this is the perfect time for you to empower your child. If your child says that they don't know something or how to find it, try not to step in and find out for them. Help them navigate through who or what their resources are and encourage them to utilize those resources. You don't know all the answers either, so teach them how you figure it out. Help them to problem solve for themselves because they will feel so accomplished and able when they have done this all on their own. Take pride in their ability to do those things for themselves rather than because you are taking care of them and doing those things. Number two, they may be overwhelmed at times. You cannot always fix that feeling either. It is okay for them to sit in that feeling for a little bit. Get comfortable with them being uncomfortable. Feel free to commiserate about what a miserable feeling that is, but prevent yourself from trying to take that feeling away from them. You cannot be there to fix everything next year, so this is a great year for them to understand that this feeling is generally fleeting and that sometimes you need to spend a few minutes in it before you are ready to get up and get things done. Like me every year when I have to do my taxes in April. Yes, they are busy. Yes, this is a time of great responsibility for them. No, it is not helpful for you to do it for them because unfortunately, you may be sending a message inadvertently that you do not think they're capable of doing it themselves. Number three, keep in mind that the best forms of support are not necessarily people who know exactly what to say or what to do, but people who make you feel supported. It is like that age-old phrase, it is not what they said or did, it is how they made you feel, that is most likely for you to remember. And finally, help them to remember that there is not a right answer in this process or one perfect place. They can likely find happiness in so many places, so it is okay if the answer is no, because it simply means that was not their place, at least right now, and that they can explore another path. Remind them that taking a different path doesn't mean it is the wrong path. It is quite simply their path to get to where they are going. Don't forget that they will likely look at you to see how you respond to those potential disappointments. When you find yourself feeling nostalgic and thinking about their first day of kindergarten or their first big game or concert, think about what you wanted for them then. You wanted them to have a good experience, to learn, and to grow. Remember that not every day in between those times have been filled with all positive things. They have had struggles. You have likely seen them cry because someone hurt their feelings or because they were frustrated or disappointed. You could not fix all of those issues then, and you cannot protect them from all of those feelings now. Instead, what you can do is provide a safe space for them to come to when they need help problem solving, to admit to them that you don't have all of the answers and that navigating the unknowns of life is always hard. During this season in their life, you have a beautiful opportunity to be your child's cheerleader and biggest supporter, and even more importantly, the safe space for them to land no matter what the outcome of this process brings. You can help them to feel that even though they don't know exactly what is going to happen, that it is okay not to know. And you can help them to learn the tools to ensure that they can navigate all of the unknowns in their life with support because they are capable of working through difficult times and they are not alone. Please reach out to your child's counselor if you are finding that they are struggling with any portion of this process. It is important for us to know that information so we can best assist them. Remember, your child is still looking to you for support, encouragement, understanding, but ultimately approval. You can be the person with whom years later they remember sharing this exciting time, and maybe one day if they're asked to recall a time when someone helped them to navigate uncertainty, they will think of you. The passage I'm about to read is called "Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be" by Frank Bruni, and is written by a father to his son, Matt. It communicates this simple message: I am proud of you no matter what. We encourage you to echo this sentiment in your own special way to your own child during this time. Our hope is that this passage helps shape your perspective as you navigate the important role you play on this journey to the next chapter in your child's life. Dear Matt, on the night before you received your first college response, we wanted to let you know that we could not be any prouder of you than we are today. Whether or not you get accepted does not determine how proud we are of everything you have accomplished and the wonderful person you have become. That will not change based on what admissions officers decide about your future. We will celebrate with joy wherever you get accepted, and the happier you are with those responses, the happier we will be. But your worth as a person, as a student, and as our son is not diminished or influenced in the least by what these colleges have decided. If it does not go your way, you'll take a different route to get where you want. There is not a single college in this country that would not be lucky to have you, and you are capable of succeeding at any of them. We love you as deep as the ocean, as high as the sky, all the way around the world and back again, and to wherever you are headed. Please remember, we are here to help support you and your child, to help keep things in perspective, to celebrate the highs, and assist with navigating the lows. We want what you want for them to be happy and successful wherever they go next. We appreciate the time you have taken to come this evening, and we hope to continue to work in partnership with you to support your children as they navigate this exciting time in their lives. Thanks.
Hello? Oh, it's on. Okay. Okay, so thank you to my colleagues for the first portion of our presentation. We're now going to start our question and answer portion of the night. And for those of you who were here at our junior parent presentation, you may remember that we like to kick off this part of the night by me asking you some questions. I promise I will not randomly call on you. We are going to look for volunteers, and just with like any other type of game, there is an incentive, so there are prizes for your participation. So we will, I want to officially welcome you to, no, keep going. This is Trainer Trivia. Okay, so let me make sure I have my prizes here. Okay, before we begin, I do want to give a special shout out to Mrs. Smith, who is the Director of School Counseling, who helped create this amazing visual for our trivia portion. So thank you for that. Okay, So we are going to begin with the first question of the night. This is tricky, I am going to be honest, because it's not something that we covered in tonight's presentation. So there may be an option for you to phone a friend. We shall see. I'm going to start off with our first question. Go ahead. So in the 23-24 application season, what percentage of schools on the Common App required a test score to submit an application? So we have 4 choices. I'm going to give a little help here, the phone a friend option, that there are 1,074 Common App schools, member institutions. So knowing that, there's 1,074. What is your guess of how many schools require a score? Okay. Okay, hold on a second. Do you want to? Okay, hang on a second.
I feel like in the middle is like the first hand I saw go up.
Okay, we have a guess of 10%. That is a great guess, but is not correct. However, because you were the first person, I'm going to still give you a prize. So stay put. Hold on. Okay, so we're going to go over here. Go ahead for a guess. 4%. 4%. Yes, you are the winner. Oh, go ahead. Good job. Okay. So 4%. Yes. Okay. Okay. Hold on. We have to move. Okay, yes, we have a winner. Okay, here we go. Okay, yes, so 4%. So we know that several institutions this year are going to start requiring test scores. So we are going to monitor this trend. We do expect potentially this number to increase next year. So if you have any junior students, maybe you'll remember this for next year. Okay. And before I go on to my next question, there was actually an interesting statistic that Common App said. They said that the number of applicants not reporting a test score is increasing faster than the number of applicants reporting a test score since 2021. So obviously we're seeing just an increase of students choosing not to report on the Common App. Okay, our next question. Okay, how many schools can my student apply to under an early decision plan? Now this was covered in the presentation by Ms. Oh, we have so many people. I love this. Okay, we're gonna go right over here. Great guess. And actually, this is a tricky question. That's right. So, okay, great. So we're going to kind of go a little into depth. So yeah, you are our winner. So let me kind of explain the answer. He said 2. Now, I would accept 1 or 2, and this is the reason why. So students can only apply to one school under one early decision plan. So if your student applies early decision 1 and is denied or deferred, they are released from that early decision agreement, which would then allow them to submit another application under early decision 2, something we call ED2. So for that answer, I would have accepted 1 or 2, but thank you. Okay, so that concludes my question and answer. So thank you for your participation. I'm gonna have my colleagues join me, and we have some people gonna use the mic because we're going to open it up to your questions. Please remember to kind of keep them general. If you have a very specific question, please reach out to your individual school counselor. I'm going to have my colleagues join me. And here you go. Okay, so does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask and have us answer?
First of all, can we give it up for Ms. Trainer, who may or may not have missed her calling as a game show host?
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Just a quick question on the Common App. With the essay, let's say you submit one school and then you want to go back and change the essay for the second submission. Is that possible, or is there a restriction on that?
Yes, so once you submit your application to one school, it's like putting it in the mail, so you can't take it back, but then you are allowed to go back in and make edits and make changes, to anything actually in that application before you submit for the next school.
So yes, thank you so much for this great and very thorough presentation. So I have a question about self-reporting the SAT scores. So I'm just a little confused about the process. So when the schools say self-report, does that mean self-report for now, and then later you need to send me an official SAT score? Or does that mean self-report and we don't need an SAT score from you unless you enroll? So maybe just help me understand that a little better.
Yes, so what that means is that they self-report, potentially on the Common App, possibly on the SRAR, maybe in the portal. They have to follow the directions of where they get to self-report. And then the answer to the back part of your question is they only submit official test scores if they decide to enroll at that institution. So at that point, they would submit an official transcript, an official test score, in order to make sure that it matches the information that they've provided earlier on in the process. I sense that there's a part two of your question.
It is a part two. So the self-reporting part where the school says self-report, all schools, when they say self-report, means only send me an SAT score when you enroll. All schools mean that? Or is that a school, like school by school specific?
If they are talking about the test score, yes, that is what they mean. If they're talking about the transcript, then you're filling out another form, so you have to make sure that you have completed that in addition to submitting the application.
Okay,
as well.
got it.
But yes, for the test score, that is what they mean.
I just kind of want to add to that because sometimes we get a lot of questions from students or parents that say, I apply test optional, oh gosh, and then they took the SAT and their score changed and they want to submit it at that time later. And that, whether you can then change to submit test scores, is going to vary from school to school. So that's just an important piece I want to say that, you know, if you are test optional, you may not be able to change that later. Does that make sense? Even though I know your question was self-report, but I just want to kind
I
of
think
touch on
too,
that.
whether you're self-reporting scores or you're self-reporting courses or grades, eventually you'll be submitting the official, which is either the transcript coming from us to that's verified or from the testing agency.
Great question. Another question?
The FAFSA, do I do it myself or my child does that? Or we both? Oh, parents, okay.
Question about the FAFSA, will the student do it or the parent? The parent will fill out the FAFSA form.
So sort of. There is a student section and a parent section, and there are actually separate logins for the only reason I know this is because I just had to do this last year, but so there are two different ones. Not that you couldn't help your kid with filling out theirs, but there is a separate one for them and one for you. They link together. So you just kind of have to follow the directions within completing the FAFSA for the parent portion and the student portion.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. I have a question. So when we categorize the college in terms of the reach, target, and safety, is there a limitation in the number of colleges you categorize, or it's up to the parents and the student to decide?
So on the Common App, you can only apply to 20 colleges. So if a student goes beyond 20, you'll have to find another way to apply, whether through the institution directly. Prior to the pandemic, we used to see 5 to 7, 7 to 10 colleges. Now the truth is we're seeing more like 10 to 13, and that's really reflecting more what's happening with the test optional. So the pools are getting so big, and so the colleges can't predict, and therefore we don't want to see students, sitting on a lot of wait lists. But if that's the case, then you're going to be looking to increase your targets and safeties. But again, targets and safeties where we feel there's enough statistical data based on what we have in Naviance and then the common data set to say that it is a target and safety. But typically also students will increase their number of schools based on their reaches. Those are hopes and dreams. I don't think a counselor is going to advise a student not to. That would be a personal decision with the family.
Thank you again. Very informational and inspirational as well. Building on the question earlier about the online systems we use, are there separate student IDs and parent IDs? And I think you said they also get linked somehow, so even from Naviance or many of the systems we use. Could you just go over again which IDs are used?
I can take that one, Ms. Cahill.
Oh, okay.
So for Naviance, there is a separate parent account and a separate student account. So the parent account, you can do almost everything except kind of what we've talked about tonight, which is actually the matching and the linking and the requesting. That would only be for students to be able to do. But for parents, all of the tools that we talked about last year during the junior presentation about college research and whether it's a good fit and the campus and all that, those other types of information that you can still access on the parent account.
Thank you for such an excellent overview. I just wanted to compliment Ms. Cahill for your heartfelt comments out of all of the fact and information that I heard tonight. I just appreciated your guidance on how to help our children get through this. So I just wanted to tell you that.
Thank you.
Hi. When deciding whether or not to submit scores, is it more important to take a look at the information in the common data set or the scattergrams in Naviance?
Does anyone else want to take it? I mean, I know I talked about the common data set, so I'll take that one. Truly, I think the common data set is the answer to your question, because the Naviance scattergrams have two issues. Number one, they're data over the past 5 years. So they don't show you last year's information. They show you the data over time, which is a good thing in terms of seeing the trend. However, the thing that it also misses is that it doesn't tell you whether the students submitted their score or not. So you might look, for example, at those plots on the scattergram and see students accepted and think, oh, well, they're in my student's range. The problem is you don't know whether that student submitted the score. The other thing you don't know is whether they submitted a different score, meaning that there's an SAT graph and an ACT graph. And you don't know whether a point on the SAT graph is the same point on the ACT graph or not. Like, you have no way of knowing that level of detail. We do. So if they come in and they start asking deeper questions about, I looked at the common data set, I've looked at the scattergrams, what do you think, right? Because sometimes they're like kind of cuspy. They're in that range where they're like, I could probably submit, I could probably not submit. What do you think I should do? And listen, it is a judgment call, and we will try to help them make that judgment call, but you're, again, using previous data to inform a future decision, right? So you're just trying to use all of the information you have. The common data set is truly much more specific information than what you're seeing on the scattergrams.
Hello, I just wanted to ask about the deadlines for actually submitting the college applications. I understood that this early decision is by November 1st, November 15, but what about the, let's say, normal application? Is it the same for all the colleges, or I need to check the website of each college separately, or Naviance to find that deadline?
So you want to check the college's website for that. So every school may have a multitude of deadlines that you can choose from. They may say we offer early decision and early action, or early decision and regular decision. And whichever decision you choose, that's the deadline ultimately that you're working towards. I do want to mention something else about the sending the scores. We talked about the college visits at Ridge High School, the rep visits, where colleges are coming to the media center and meeting with students. So if you're unsure about, like, should I send, or who sends, or what score is, like, kind of, some schools will have like a cutoff, we can ask that. We can ask those in those visits. You can ask that of college reps. I was in a University of Chicago visit earlier this week, and they shared a new policy they have called no harm test policy. This is new to all of us. And by the way, when one of us gets information, we're like so eager to share with the group. We're like a very cohesive group, so you have one, you have all of us, because we like to kind of inform each other. So what they said was, the no harm was, they said, we want to take the stress out of test optional because we understand that it's a big decision for students. So he said, if you submit a test score that will not be helpful, the admissions officer will use their discretion and not count it when they sit and make the decision about the application. So every school does something a little bit differently. So when someone said, like, delve into the website and ask more questions of a specific school, that's a great example.
Sorry, I just want to piggyback off of Mrs. Kukaro's answer because it reminds me of your question related to deadlines. Most of the time, the deadline is really up to you. You use whichever deadline works best for your student when they're ready to apply. However, there are certain schools that will be very upfront with students and say, we take the majority of our applicant pool from this decision. So, for example, University of Maryland has an early action deadline of November 1st and a regular decision deadline of something bizarre like January 20th. Don't ask me, but that's what they do. And they will be very upfront with students that they take more than 80% of their applicant pool from their early action deadline. which means if you miss the November 1st deadline and you're applying with a January 20th deadline, you automatically put yourself in only somewhere between 10 to 20% of what they're going to take, which makes it so much more competitive for you to get in. So there are some schools, and we will catch that on a student's list. We'll say, don't use that deadline, bump that up and use the earlier deadline. It's really important that you do this. But as Mrs. Kukuro mentioned, it's a reason to sign up for college visits for your student, have them go to those visits and have them ask questions. I was thinking about using this deadline. Is there any difference between applying early action and regular decision at your particular institution? I am not telling you this because the answer is always apply EA. That is actually not necessarily good advice because your student may not be done testing. They may not be ready to apply by that deadline. There could be reasons that they want to show more movement in their transcript. There could be a lot of reasons why they shouldn't do it, but for University of Maryland specifically and some other institutions, it is very important that they use the earlier deadline.
Yeah, I have a question about submitting a recommendation letter from an employer. You mentioned that the teachers' recommendation letters are submitted by using the Naviance app, but how about employers?
I can take that question. So Ms. Cahill talked about earlier how the teacher letters are submitted through Naviance. Many students have a coach or someone that they work with outside of school or an employer who would be a good person to speak on their character, and that is submitted through the Common App. So in the Common App, there's a section called Other Recommender, and in that section, the student can write the person's name and the email address, and they will get an email from Common App and can submit their letter directly to Common App, and similar to Naviance, the student never sees that letter, and we can help them navigate that process.
Yeah, and just one thing I want to add to that, you also want to check with your schools that you're applying to whether or not they will accept a letter coming from other. Like they may just only accept the 2 teacher letters and the counselor letter. They may not be accepting other recommendations too. But the way they do it is the way Ms. McGivney explained.
And you can find that information on the website. Yeah. If it's just teacher specific, you'll be able to find that on their website.
It's a good time to mention with letters of rec to follow the instructions on the particular school's website, because we have kids every year that say, well, they said 1, but I'm going to send 2 because it looks better. And what it looks like is they didn't follow the directions. So if you want to be mindful of that, we've heard that from multiple college reps. Like if we say 1 to 2, we mean 1 to 2. So it's really important to follow the recommendations on the website of each school.
Yeah, hi. So how important is it for your daughter, son, to have visited a college when they're applying? Obviously, sometimes location is a little difficult to get to. Is it, certainly with an ED decision, I would think they should have visited. But in terms of like these college fairs that you're having or the other opportunities to talk to a school, what's really the best practice in that situation, you know?
That's a terrific question. I completely agree with you that if it's an ED application, you really should have set foot on their campus before you're making that level of commitment. I would also say that with modern technology, one of the great things that has come out of that is virtual tours of campuses, ways for them to get a lot of information about schools. But I will also give you an anecdotal piece of advice when it comes to this. So of course, you know, I just did this last year. My daughter comes to me and says, here are the things I'm looking for in a school. I want a big school. I want it to be in the South. I want it to be near water. I'm like, are we going on vacation or are we going to college? But regardless, these are the things that she felt that she wanted. So of course, I, you know, put my head together with some of my colleagues and we come up with this list of places. She is in New Hampshire. There's water there, by the way. There is in fact water. It is a mid-sized school in the north. So the reason I mention this is because they don't always know what they like until they get onto a campus. And I think it's at least important to get feel for what does an urban school feel like? What does a suburban school feel like? Now, if it's the particular school, even better. But I do think they need to know what does a big school feel like? What does a mid-sized school feel like? What does a smaller school? The other thing we run into all the time is I don't want to go to a small school. Okay, Ridge High School is less than 2,000 students. Colleges are almost always bigger than that. So they don't really know what they mean until they see a school. So that's a good question. The question, I'm going to repeat it just because it might be hard to hear you in the audience. The question is, from the school's perspective, if you haven't visited, does it mean that you're not showing like appropriate interest for that school? The answer to that question is, it depends, because some schools track interest and other places do not. And that is something you should know, because the other thing is, you can express interest by sending an email to an admissions counselor to ask questions, attending a virtual tour. There are other ways to show interest that don't necessarily mean that you've been on a campus. If a school is 3,000 miles away, they're going to understand that it's less likely that you've been there. If it's 30 miles away, there's going to be less of an excuse for not seeing it.
I just want to add to that, is that obviously it's challenging to go visit a lot of schools with schedules and costs and things like that, but so any type of engagement is important. I know we were at a college last year and they said that they were seeing if students were opening the emails that they send them. They can check kind of like their engagement in that way too. So I think that if you're unable to visit a campus from the college perspective, if there's other ways that you can engage with the school that Ms. Cahill just kind of mentioned too. But again, seeing the schools at some point really helps with making decisions down the road, but I do think that there's lots of ways for students to kind of learn that through virtual tours and campus visits and all that stuff. Okay, we have a question right here.
Yeah, I have a question related to the recommendation letter. Teacher agreed to write a recommendation letter last year, but the teacher left the school district this year. Can the teacher still submit recommendation letter? Or the student should find another teacher to write a letter?
So the answer to that question is, it depends. If that teacher has potentially already given us their letter of recommendation, which some teachers did do before leaving, or have communicated with the student, here's how to communicate with me. They may have moved to a different school, for example, and they're like, here's my email address, you can communicate with me, or here's my personal email address so that you can communicate with me so we can work out how the logistics of that will work. Definitely, that can still be sent to colleges. If they are having trouble contacting that teacher, that is when the it's time to go a different route process may happen, and I would encourage them to talk to us to see if A, do we have the letter, because we might, and B, if we don't, when is the time frame to sort of say, maybe this isn't the route to go, and let's like brainstorm who you're gonna ask instead. The other thing to consider is that there are a lot of schools out there that actually do not use letters of recommendation. If your child is applying to larger institutions, and I mean like they're very large, like Pitt, Rutgers, Penn State, they do not read letters of recommendation. So depending upon how many of those schools your child has on their list, one teacher letter for other institutions that require them, plus the counselor letter, may actually suffice for them. So there may be no need to scramble at this point and find somebody else.
Yeah, hi, just one quick question about if, as you mentioned about the common data set, and you can use that based on your test scores and GPA to figure out the safety, reach, or target school. Is there a way to look at the data set and figure out subject specific? Because sometimes what is like safety reach, like on an average, might be different than if it is a popular subject. Is there some kind of a data set where you can figure that kind of stuff?
So that is, it's not that it can never be figured out, it's that it's not in the common data set. So some colleges are pretty upfront about how competitive one school within their university is over another. And it is not always the same programs. Like, you can't make a blanket statement and say engineering programs are always harder to get into, business programs are always harder to get into, nursing programs are always harder to get into. Like, yes, those are typically very competitive programs. However, you have schools like Syracuse, where one of their premier programs is the Newhouse School of Communications. I wouldn't typically say communications is the hardest program to get into unless I was talking about that school. What you will find out from visiting or from asking questions of an admissions rep is they can tell you this is a very competitive college. Please be aware that these are the most competitive majors. You visit Clemson, they'll tell you that their health sciences and nursing majors are their most competitive majors and the most typically high in demand. So you will get anecdotal information from reps in both meetings here at Ridge and also on college visits in person. And frankly, those are the times to go ahead and get on email, and not you, by the way, your child, to email and say, this is the major I'm considering. Can you give me some information about how competitive this program is in comparison to maybe this other one that I'm considering, for example?
I think we're going to just have like 2 more questions. I know we have a hand back here. So patiently waiting.
I was curious about the supplementals you mentioned, about what are those, and can you give some examples of these supplementals?
So some colleges will ask specific questions that reflect their philosophy, their values, their priorities. And so these questions can vary. Like the most popular ones are maybe talk about an extracurricular activity that's been most meaningful to you, or why us? Why do you want to attend our school? Where they're going to be looking for specific details where the student is matching what they've done with what they'd like to do on that campus. So the key to that is to be very specific with regards to the student's experiences and also what the college offers. The third question that we're seeing a lot now in light of the affirmative action decision from last summer is about diversity. So they're asking questions to give students a place to talk about challenges, diversity, inclusion. You know, it's clearly a question that's directed towards students who maybe were affected by the decision of the affirmative action, but it's also an opportunity for students to talk about other challenges. You know, that can be more challenging for students depending on what their experiences are, you know, what their background is, but those would probably be the 3 most popular. And then more selective schools will ask more competitive questions. So once you start getting into the top tier schools, you're not going to see so much recycling of the questions. There might be, you know, similar overlap, but they're going to be asking questions that are, you know, a little bit more pointed, less word counts because it's harder to be concise. So they can easily spot, you know, nothing when it's written in, you know, less words. So it just gets harder, right? When they give you a lot of words, there's a lot of room for the kids to become more verbose, which doesn't really work in their favor.
Okay, go ahead.
So the question is regarding Navian's parent account. So do both parents have to have separate accounts, or can one parent can do it, or how does it work?
So both parents are given separate accounts, meaning that you technically have separate logins. I mean, ironically, neither of you have to do anything really on Naviance. You can, you don't have to. Okay. So truly, yes, you can use one account. If you trust your spouse with your password, I mean, have at it.
Okay, our last question over here. Go ahead.
Yeah, the question is the transcript, the names on that is incorrect. So how to correct that? How to request for that?
I'm sorry, it was hard for me to hear you.
The high school transcript has incorrect names, parent names.
Oh.
How to correct that?
So typically that is pulling from registration information that was provided at the time of registration. So if there's an error, you can just contact both our registrar, because we need to correct that and make sure that that's correct in our Genesis system, and then also just contact your child's counselor and we can fix that in Naviance as well.
Sorry. Okay, I'm just going to close out tonight's presentation by thanking you. You guys have been a fabulous audience for your participation and the questions and answers, so we really appreciate your coming out tonight, and we hope that you found this presentation informative. I hope you leave here feeling excited about this process, and most of all, I hope you feel really supported by our department through this process. We are here to help you. Encourage your student to come see us. If we don't have the answer, we will find it out. We're often yelling to each other for asking questions. So please lean on us and let us help guide your student through this process. Don't ever hesitate to reach out. We understand the emotion that goes on with this process. So again, thank you. And if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to use your phone, I guess you can just scan the QR code to give us some parent feedback on the presentation. It doesn't work. Okay. Well, thank you. Well, thanks for the feedback. It doesn't work. Okay. It says needs permission? Okay, well, thank you. All right, well, we'll email you. If you have specific feedback you'd like to provide, you can certainly email your counselor or you can email our director. So thank you. We tried. Thank you.